The air inside the training bay was thick with the smell of sweat, rubber mats, and adrenaline. Overhead, fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile glow across the rows of recruits standing shoulder to shoulder. Boots squeaked faintly against the floor as bodies shifted, restless, waiting for the next drill. This wasn't just another day of training. It was evaluation day, the day that separated those who had the grit to push forward from those who would be quietly reassigned to desk jobs or support roles. Private First Class Elena Park adjusted her stance in the line, her back straight, eyes fixed forward. At 5'4" and lean, she was often mistaken for fragile. Her dark hair was tied tightly back, not a strand out of place. She'd heard the whispers from day one: too small, won't last, probably here for the benefits. None of them knew the hours she'd poured into conditioning her body. The nights she spent reviewing techniques until muscle memory burned them into her bones. What she lacked in size, she made up for in precision. But the military was slow to see what didn't come in obvious packages. Staff Sergeant Cole Briggs paced the line of recruits like a predator sizing up prey. Broad-shouldered, scarred, and with a face that seemed carved from granite, he carried the weight of multiple combat deployments and the authority of a man who had survived them. His reputation preceded him: ruthless, uncompromising, and merciless in training. To Briggs, the battlefield was not a place for doubt, and he made sure his recruits understood that lesson the hard way. Combat isn't about who can recite protocols, Briggs barked, his voice echoing off the cinderblock walls. It's about who can take a hit, get back up, and keep fighting until the other guy stops breathing. Some of you don't have that instinct, some of you never will. His eyes swept across the line and landed on Elena. They lingered there, narrowing with something between disdain and amusement. "Park," he called out, voice sharp. She stepped forward, chin lifted, pulse steady despite the murmurs that rippled through the ranks. "Yes, Sergeant." Briggs smirked, the expression twisting across his weathered face. "You've got heart, I'll give you that. But heart doesn't win fights. Size does, power does, and you," he gestured toward her compact frame with a dismissive wave. "You've got neither. You're fragile. Like glass. Out there, you'd shatter." A few recruits chuckled under their breath, trying to stay out of Briggs's line of sight. Elena didn't flinch. Briggs stepped back onto the mat, motioning for her to follow. "Let's give the unit a lesson. You think you belong here? Prove it. Last 30 seconds against me. Just 30. If you can do that, I'll shut my mouth for good. If not, well, maybe you'll finally see you're wasting your time." The silence in the room was heavy, thick with anticipation. Elena's boots made no sound as she crossed the floor. Her face was calm, unreadable, but her eyes burned with an intensity that silenced the whispers. She stopped at the edge of the mat, squared her shoulders, and met Briggs's stare head-on. 30 seconds, she said softly, her voice steady, carrying farther than anyone expected. "I'll take them." A low ripple of surprise moved through the room. Briggs's grin widened. He had expected hesitation, fear, maybe even a refusal. Instead, he was met with unshaken resolve. The recruits leaned forward, breaths held, watching as the smallest soldier in the room prepared to step into the ring with the man who had broken down countless others before her. The challenge had been issued. The stage was set, and Elena Park, calm as ever, walked into the storm with fire in her eyes. The circle closed in around them, boots shuffling against the mat as recruits formed a ring. The air felt heavier now, buzzing with anticipation. Some leaned forward, eager to watch the show. Others crossed their arms, silently rooting for Elena but too cautious to voice it. Briggs stretched his neck, the muscles in his shoulders rolling under his uniform. He looked like a wolf who had already decided the fight was won. "Clock starts when I say," he barked. "Try not to blink, people, you'll miss it." Elena bent her knees slightly, hands loose but ready, her breathing controlled. She remembered every drill, every late-night repetition. Technique over strength, speed over size. But before she could settle into her stance, Briggs moved. It was less a strike and more like a storm, sudden, overwhelming, brutal. He surged forward, his weight crashing into her like a wall. Elena braced, but it was like trying to hold back a truck. His arm swept low, his shoulder driving upward, and in the next instant her feet left the ground. The sound of her body hitting the mat echoed through the bay, a solid, gut-wrenching thud that drew a collective gasp from the watching recruits. Some flinched, others winced, a few couldn't help but snicker, the laugh sharp and nervous in the tense silence. Briggs planted his knee against her torso, pressing her shoulders back against the mat with one hand. His grip was iron, unyielding. He leaned down, close enough for only her to hear, his breath hot against her ear. "Over already," he muttered, voice dripping with mock pity. Then louder, for the room. "Fight's done. Told you she'd shatter." The recruits stirred. Some shook their heads. A couple whispered under their breath, their sympathy for Elena tempered by the reality of what they'd just seen. To them, she looked crushed, pinned, powerless. A lesson, maybe, in the limits of determination. Briggs straightened, still keeping her down with casual force, his grin spreading wide across his face. He flexed his free hand as if he hadn't even broken a sweat. 30 seconds? He said to the crowd. She didn't last 3. Laughter broke out this time, fuller, bolder, encouraged by his confidence. Elena didn't move. Her chest rose and fell in controlled rhythm, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the ceiling lights. Her body was still, her expression unreadable. To most watching, it seemed like surrender, like the fight had been drained out of her with that single slam. The silence that followed was different now, less anticipation, more conclusion. Whispers darted through the circle. Knew she couldn't handle it. Poor kid never had a chance. He's going easy on her, really. The sting of humiliation settled into the air like smoke. Briggs eased his weight slightly, savoring the moment, soaking in the validation of the crowd. He wanted them to see weakness, to learn the lesson he'd hammered into every recruit before, that not everyone belonged on the battlefield. From the outside, it looked like he'd made his point. Elena Park lay still, the smallest figure in the room swallowed up by the sergeant's bulk and the echo of her fall. The crowd's verdict was already written in their eyes. She was beaten, finished. But beneath the weight pinning her down, her mind was anything but still. Her heart beat steady, her breath measured, her focus sharp. She was not broken, not yet, and certainly not done. The mat was cool beneath Elena's back, the weight of Briggs pressing down like a slab of stone. The voices around her had already shifted from shock to certainty, their whispers cementing the story they thought they were seeing. She was overmatched, outclassed, finished before she even had a chance to prove herself. Briggs's grin hovered above her, smug and satisfied, as if the outcome had always been predetermined. Elena let their words fade into background noise. She drew her focus inward, the way she had learned during endless hours of repetition, the way her instructors had drilled into her until the motions were second nature. Breath in, breath out. Slow, steady, measured. Her body was compact, yes, but it was a machine honed for precision. Briggs had strength. She had leverage, and leverage was the quiet equalizer. His knee shifted slightly as he adjusted his balance, loosening just enough pressure to savor his little victory. That was the opening. Elena's eyes snapped to the angle of his arm, the way his wrist bent without awareness, his elbow hanging just a fraction too far past her shoulder line. She had practiced this reversal 1,000 times on soldiers twice his size, late at night in the gym when no one was watching. Muscle memory carried her where brute strength could not. Her hips twisted sharply, her legs coiling like springs beneath him. In a single fluid motion, she rolled her shoulder under, hooking her arm around his and trapping his wrist against her chest. Briggs's grin faltered, confusion flashing across his face as his weight shifted. Elena planted her foot, pushed, and snapped her body into the reversal with perfect timing. The world seemed to spin for a heartbeat. The larger man's balance gave way, his body toppling forward as she redirected his own momentum against him. In less than a second, the sergeant who had held her down with all the confidence of a man teaching a lesson was flat on his back, staring up at the lights. The impact rattled the mat, the sound echoing louder than her fall had minutes before. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by a silence so absolute it felt suffocating. Elena flowed with the motion, her knees pressing into his shoulders, her grip tightening across his wrist and elbow. In one seamless movement, she had pinned him, her weight distributed with surgical precision. Briggs tried to push up, to muscle his way free, but the lock was set. The more he strained, the deeper her control sank in. Her breathing remained calm, even, her expression unreadable as she stared down at him. To the watching recruits, it looked effortless, almost unreal the way someone so small had just dismantled the immovable force of Staff Sergeant Cole Briggs. The silence stretched long, broken only by the sound of Briggs's labored breath and the squeak of the mat beneath his futile effort. Then, as realization dawned on every face in the circle, the room erupted. Shouts, laughter, cheers, all tangled together in a chaotic surge of disbelief and exhilaration. The impossible had happened in front of their eyes. The sergeant who prided himself on being untouchable had been flipped, pinned, humiliated by the very recruit he had mocked. Briggs's face turned crimson, a mix of fury and shame battling in his expression. His pride was bruised, his authority cracked, but there was no denying what had just taken place. Elena released the lock only when she knew he could not spin it as anything but what it was, defeat. She rose smoothly to her feet, posture straight, uniform neat despite the struggle, her breathing as steady as when she had stepped onto the mat. The recruits parted instinctively as she stepped back, their eyes following her with something new respect. Some were still wide-eyed, as if they'd just witnessed a ghost slip through their ranks, rewriting the rules they thought they knew. Briggs sat up slowly, the disbelief etched into his features. He had underestimated her, mocked her, crushed her to the ground. And now he was the one staring up, humiliated before the very soldiers he meant to impress. Elena said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence she left behind spoke louder than any taunt could. The lesson was his to carry. The fire in her eyes, however, told the crowd what she already knew. She had never been fragile, and she would never break. Briggs lay flat on the mat for a moment longer than he should have, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths, the fluorescent lights above washing his face in harsh relief. The silence pressed in around him, punctuated by the pounding in his ears. He had been slammed, not just physically but publicly, undone in front of the recruits who looked to him for strength, for dominance. It was a humiliation that clung to his skin like sweat. With a grunt, he rolled to his side, bracing a hand against the mat and pushing himself up. The movement lacked his usual confidence. His body still carried its mass, its power, but now it seemed heavy, sluggish under the weight of what had just happened. His jaw clenched, eyes darting briefly toward the recruits who were staring, their expressions wide with disbelief. Some wore shock, others a restrained sort of glee, but all of them looked different now, changed by what they had witnessed. Elena had not moved far. She stood at the edge of the mat, her stance precise, her breathing calm, posture aligned like she'd never been knocked down in the first place. There was no smirk on her face, no flash of triumph. She did not look at Briggs with gloating eyes or the satisfaction of revenge. She simply stood, composed, as though everything that had transpired was inevitable. When he finally managed to rise onto one knee, she stepped forward and, without hesitation, extended her hand to him. The gesture hit harder than any reversal or pin. It wasn't pity, but it wasn't arrogance either. It was respect delivered in silence, a single action that underscored everything he had failed to see. For a moment, Briggs just stared at it, his pride warring with the reality that every set of eyes in the room was fixed on him. He could refuse, push her hand away, cling to the tattered scraps of authority. But that would mean confirming weakness. not strength. With a low, reluctant exhale, he took her hand. Her grip was firm, steady, pulling him to his feet in a single, smooth motion. As he rose, the recruits around them erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the walls of the training bay like a thunderclap. Some clapped loudly, almost defiantly, while others gave smaller, restrained bursts of approval. But together, the chorus carried an unmistakable message. Elena Park had earned their respect, and there was no undoing it. Briggs's face was flushed, his jaw tight, but he stood tall again, brushing off the front of his uniform with deliberate care. He leaned closer, just enough so only Elena could hear, his voice gravel low and grudging. "Well done." The words were quiet, barely audible over the applause, but they carried weight. It wasn't surrender, not entirely, but it was acknowledgement. For a man like Briggs, that was as much as anyone could expect. He turned away sharply, raising his voice for the recruits. "Dismissed." The circle broke apart slowly, the recruits dispersing, but their eyes lingered on Elena as they moved. They didn't look at her with pity now. They didn't laugh. They carried a new expression, something closer to awe, mingled with the recognition that they had seen a line crossed, a balance shifted. The smallest soldier in the room had faced the biggest, and the outcome had rewritten their understanding of strength. Elena adjusted her uniform, smoothing the sleeve where Briggs's grip had wrinkled the fabric, tugging her collar back into place. Her face remained impassive, lips neither smiling nor trembling, her gaze steady as she stepped off the mat. She carried no visible triumph, no need for it. What she had shown spoke louder than any celebration. Strength wasn't always about size. It wasn't about rank stitched into a sleeve or a chest full of ribbons. It was resilience. It was control. It was the refusal to stay down when the world expected you to. Elena Park didn't need applause, and she didn't need Briggs's reluctant compliment. She had proven something more permanent, that she belonged here, that no one would forget the lesson they had just witnessed. And so she walked away, silent and resolute, leaving the echo of her victory hanging in the air long after the clapping faded.